Hey everybody, KC here. So today on Offbeat, we have an interview, a conversation with Chad Boudreaux, who has written a book called Scavenger Hunt. And uh, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to Chad was because, first of all, I love talking to first-time novelists. As someone who's got a couple of ideas for novels in my laptop, unfinished, I'm fascinated by talking to people who have written their first one. But I was really interested because this is a military intelligence thriller, and I really like those. I've had Mark Greaney, who writes the Gray Man series, on Morning Newsbeat a couple of times. Really like the genre. But I was really fascinated because Chad is somebody who worked for the government, worked for the Department of Justice, was hired at a really interesting time to work for the Department of Justice, worked for Homeland Security, and so there's a lot of accuracy in terms of how he describes place, and a real sense that he understands that milieu. So I was really wanted to talk to him about that. I'm also fascinated by the idea that people who come out of the military intelligence community, a lot of these guys write books, right? And the books are they're good yarns, they're good stories. And they know storytelling. And if nothing else on Morning Newsbeat, we talk about the importance of storytelling. I'll tell you how to get the book at the bottom. The book is called Scavenger Hunt. The author is Chad Boudreaux. I hope you enjoy my conversation with him. So Chad Boudreaux, welcome to Morning Newsbeat.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Listen, thrilled. So the book is Scavenger Hunt. It's a novel. It's a thriller. It takes place in sort of the military-industrial complex. So let's start by what is your background? How did you, this is clearly written by somebody who understands this world. So talk a little bit about your background and what you sort of bring to the story.
Yeah, so I'm a lawyer by trade. I grew up a trial lawyer and was practicing in Austin, Texas for a few years and trying cases at a young age. And then the night before the September 11 terrorist attacks, I was hired by the Department of Justice, Main Justice in DC. And so the next morning I was going to give my farewell to the law firm, and I saw the towers getting hit, saw the Pentagon getting hit. And a couple of weeks later, I packed up everything that I owned. I had my wife and a Great Dane named Judge, who's the only true character in my book. And we made our way to DC, and life changed after that.
That must have been an extraordinary cauldron to be thrown into at that particular moment. The world quite literally changed for everybody, and you had to be at some level at the tip of the spear in trying to figure out how to deal with it.
Yeah, the Department of Justice at the time, there was no Homeland Security Department. There was no DNI, Director of National Intelligence. Obviously you had the Bureau, you had the agency, but the Department of Justice was squarely in the middle of it. One of the first things that I was assigned to was the September 11 Victim Compensation Fund. That was the taxpayer-funded fund for those that had lost loved ones or who were physically injured at the sites. And just my first day at work, seeing the survivors who had come for a meeting, probably a 30-minute scheduled meeting, lasted 3.5 hours. It took a very big emotional toll on all of us. But yeah, it was life-changing.
We're just, as we talk now, we're just days away from the anniversary. Are there lessons from, just before we get to the book, are there lessons from that experience that you sort of that you learned that you would sort of apply to whether it's public policy in terms of how the nation sort of grapples with what is an ongoing threat, even if we're not at high levels at this moment?
Yeah, when you read Scavenger Hunt, obviously the primary thing that you want from, as an author writing a novel like that, it needs to be entertaining. So I definitely did not write it with any political motivations, but if there is any kind of policy or political undertone in the book, it is this tension between national security and our privacy rights and our freedoms. And I think that as a country, as we have leaders and policymakers that are squabbling over sometimes the silliest of things, we do need to understand that there still is an enemy. Doesn't mean that it has to captivate our entire attention or national policy discussion, but you do need to have sober conversations about what we need to be doing to prepare for that. So the takeaway from your question is you have to continue to be vigilant and diligent as you think about those threats.
You think it's inevitable that there's another attack, if not on the scale of 9/11, but something's going to happen?
Yeah, so I'd just say quickly that I'm chief legal officer for a company that builds warships, and I'm here with my own opinion on
Gotcha.
things, particularly geopolitical matters. But from a geopolitical standpoint, you obviously have to be worried about terrorist threats. But China is marching, right, and we have to be thoughtful about how we deal with aggressive countries that are bent on hegemony. And so I think everything that we're doing as a country needs to be focused on what the threats are, and those are going to be your natural terrorism threats, and they're going to be more now nation state, aggression. I'll just leave it at that, aggression, and you can't take that for granted, and you have to pay attention to it.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll get beyond politics. So were there specific events though that led to, or what led sort of was the genesis of the story? What made you decide you're a lawyer? What made you decide you wanted to write a novel? And were there things that were taking place that you said, "Ooh, I can use this, I can use that"?
Yeah. So really the genesis for this novel was figuring out that there was a hidden eighth floor at the Department of Justice. And that's in the book, but it's real. So when you're walking down Pennsylvania Avenue from the White House to the Capitol, and you get to 9th Street, you'll turn left and you'll see the FBI building.
Mm-hmm.
And you turn right and you see the main Justice building. The main Justice building is fascinating. And I would get lost, just in the library and walking around. But one of the treasures that it has is this hidden eighth floor that most people, even the people who work there, don't know about. And I found a custodian that took me up there, and it was like getting behind the curtain and finding all of these different things. It used to be the FBI ballistics lab. And so when I saw that, my creative juices, I guess, started to flow. And that's when I first started to put pen to paper. I took my notes from that, I guess, attic at the Justice Department and turned it into, chapters, what is now, I guess, chapter 2.
Yeah, and it is so interesting. And I listen, I'm glad you answered that question, because it was one of the ones I had, is how is that stuff real? Because there's real verisimilitude about how you describe places. There's a sense, I think, in the book that these are real places that you've been to. I mean, whether it's in especially in Washington, D.C., in terms of capturing the place, that's hard to do.
Yeah, I mean, if you're, I would tell you, if you haven't been to Washington, D.C. and you read my book, you're going to have a pretty good and cool roadmap as to where to go. Now, you can't get into the main Justice building, but there are a lot of other spots that are in the book, and we really do. We take you around town and show you the cool spots. And then, of course, we heighten up the tension and put people in boxes that are really hard to get out of and see how they respond.
You always want to be a novelist?
No, I don't think so. I think I enjoyed living in a parallel universe when I started writing. I really started writing at the same time I found the eighth floor. We had our first child, and who just happens to be named Blake. And then my last child just happens to be named Hudson, and the protagonist in the book is Blake Hudson. Blake Hudson in the book came first, and it was my wife's idea to name the other two. But when Blake was born, we're staying up late. I had an old laptop that I don't even think would run now, and I just started typing away.
You have a third child, you're gonna have to write another book. That's just and that's just the way it's gonna work. Otherwise, you're gonna have all sorts of questions to answer at some point about how come my name wasn't in the book. So I'm curious about something. I mean, I've read a lot of books in this genre. We've had people like Mark Greaney on Morning Newsbeat to talk about their books. I'm fascinated by the idea that people who with experience in the military intelligence community are really, really good storytellers. I mean, they know how to tell a yarn, and I'm fascinated by that. And I would assume that you would subscribe to the idea that you fit that profile. Why do you think that is? Why do you think people in that line of work are really good at telling a story?
Well, you have different kinds of storytellers. You have the guy that's behind the beer and in front of the bonfire who can tell a great story. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to end up in print. The intelligence community, the defense community, I mean, they're, for the most part, they have two traits that I think require that are there for the successful writers. They have courage and they have commitment, and it really takes both of those to see it through. And you lose track of the idea that when you put something out there, it's got to be right. I mean, you can't say that you're an expert in a particular field and then go out and write something that other people are going to look at and know you have no credibility whatsoever. It's a tough crowd. It's a tough writing crowd, and it's a tough experience crowd. So I think particularly our special forces contingent, they've got courage beyond all measure, more than I could ever hope to have. But yeah, they're committed and they have courage and they can go out and do it. Now, I think creative writing is great because there are no rules. Now, that's good for some people. For some people who have, I would hope I would be in that category, but special forces or just an intelligence expert, they do have a rigor about what they do in their day-to-day. They are diligent in how they perfect their craft in their professional life. You kind of need that same structure if you're going to write. I mean, I don't put together detailed outlines, but I do have scaffolding. And within that scaffolding, that's what keeps me sane when I'm writing, and it allows me to see it through the end. So I think that's probably part of it.
I was going to ask you what your process is. I mean, are you on a laptop? Are you writing in longhand? Are you, but you don't do really, really strong outlining in advance so you know where everything's going?
I find an idea. I've got 5 in my head right now. I find an idea that I like. I get a title, and the title is going to drive kind of how I think about my theme, if you will. And then I'm up at 4:30 in the morning. I'm going to start with an outline that's going to be 50 chapters. And I'm going to think about 100,000 words because that's where my story is going to end up if I'm lucky. And I'm going to have like I said, a scaffolding of an outline. And then I'll just tell you, I mean, Stephen King says this better than I can, but there's this idea where you create your characters and then all of a sudden the characters kind of take on their own personality and go do things that you didn't expect them to do. I mean, obviously there's a little bit of silliness behind that, but I actually buy into that now because I've had my outlines turned on side of their head because my characters, did things I never would have thought they would have done.
Do you find that you use this? One of the things we talk a lot about on Morning Newsbeat is the importance for businesses to be able to tell their story, whether it's the business telling the story to their customers or even people within a business telling their story to each other. So that's a really important skill. Do you find, I mean, now you're working you're a chief legal officer for a company that makes Warcraft.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find you're using your storytelling skills in that role, and how?
So yeah, and even before that, I mean, as a lawyer, you can very much get caught up as a litigator and an appellate lawyer. You can get caught up in this arcane language. A lot of the stuff that we have comes from Latin, so using Latin terms, the same old gibberish, some of the arcane language. The best writers are the best lawyers, and the best lawyers who write are creative in their writing, and they do it in a way that's not distracting or disrespectful to the courts. But they do it in a way to tell a story. So when I'm reading briefs, I have to read a lot of them. I normally would just read like the first 2 pages because I'm going to know after the first 2 pages whether or not we're going to hook the jury or the judge, whoever the audience is. As an extension of that, in my role as a C-suite member of my company, we just came out with a mission statement, and we were grappling with what that mission statement was going to entail for an entire day. We were in lockdown in this hotel, and one of the contributions that I made to the mission statement is that our company not only promotes democracy, but it also promotes peace. Because when people think about warships, they think about aggression, being bellicose, all these different wartime themes. But when we have a submarine that nobody can see, it doesn't even have to be anywhere, and it's a deterrent and it promotes peace. So yeah, I think bringing a creative mind to a business process is crucial. It's crucial.
I think that's really interesting. I mean, the idea that Yeah, in writing a mission statement, you could get lost in the details of building and designing and all that stuff. But to talk about the fact that the end, if it's done right and used correctly, I suppose, the end product of what you do is peace. Most of a large percentage of the morning newsbeat audience are people who are in the food business, right? And people who own stores. And one of the things I always talk about is the idea that, well, if you focus just on the sales process, but you're missing the point. You're feeding people, you're nurturing, you're allowing people to feed themselves, you're nurturing both their physical beings, and if you're smart, they're sort of spiritual beings as well, or they're psychological beings. And so I think that's a really interesting sort of parallel, right? Focus on the end product, the end result, not necessarily the product.
Right. No doubt. No doubt. I think whether you're creatively writing or whether you're doing things for a business, you need to become a master of your craft. And a lot of people, they get comfortable and they're not trying to sharpen their trade craft. And so for my lawyers at my company, I will speak for my company now. If you come work for our law department, I'm going to tell you every week at least, master your trade craft, become better at what you do, and it'll help in all facets of your life.
Who do you read? I'm curious. When you're reading fiction, who do you read?
I read a lot of different authors. So I think for characters, and just genuine story, I've always been a Stephen King fan. I do love Tom Clancy. Vince Flynn was, I know he's passed away, but I wrote Scavenger Hunt having never read a Vince Flynn novel. I just read one, and it was pretty fascinating. When you look at comparables, he's probably pretty close. He really knew his stuff, and he really put it into a good story. I'm looking now up at my book deal. I do read Dan Brown and Baldacci because I want to know how they're selling so many books. And I don't mean that in a flippant way, but
No,
I always like to know who's doing really well and try to figure out what they have. Brad Thor is good. Nelson DeMille. My favorite spy novelist was Robert Ludlum. And when they do artificial intelligence on my writing for Scavenger Hunt, it came back. It wasn't Robert Ludlum. It was the guy who posthumously published his Ludlum book. So a mimicker of Ludlum was who they had me compared to, which I thought was funny because I'm a mimicker of Ludlum too.
I'm not sorry. Back up a second. What do you mean when they ran artificial intelligence on Scavenger Hunt? What do you mean by that? What did they do?
So if you're going through a publishing company, they are going to run AI on your book, and it's going to tell you everything you need to know. I mean, it tells you, the words that you use repeatedly. It tells you who you're comparable to. It tells you what books are comparable to yours. And that helps them, with the bookstores. It helps them to see how sellable your book is going to be. Now, I will say, the whole other discussion that we're not going to have today beyond storytelling is marketing a book. And that's a completely different trade. And maybe if we talk again in a year, I'll be an expert on that. I'm not, but that's a whole nother discipline. But they use it for all those different things. They find cuss words if you've got cuss words, which my book doesn't. But it finds out everything that you need.
Do they run it before they buy the book or after?
I don't know the answer. I don't know. I get it after they've accepted me for publication, but I don't know if they do it. If they're smart, they'll do it beforehand, I'm sure.
They would. That's really fascinating. So last question, you said you have like 5 ideas in your head. Do you have another book ready to go?
Yeah, so final manuscript went yesterday to the publisher for a book called Homecoming Queen. It will not be a sequel to Scavenger Hunt, but it is going to be a hold on to your seat love song to my sweet South Texas hometown, and a thriller like no other that I can write. And then the few others that I have we're going to have some Scavenger Hunt characters back for, it's going to be the third book will be in Chicago, based in Chicago and DC. We're going to be talking about Chicago Mafia in a completely different way that you've done Mafia before, but there'll be a Scavenger Hunt there. And then we'll probably be down on the border for the one after that. Because
I found myself wanting a book about, is it Jake Reed? the former CIA guy
Yeah.
who's down in Mexico, you know, basically living the Jimmy Buffett life.
Yeah.
You know, who finds himself sort of. I love books about people who have left the life and then are dragged back in by circumstance. I just think those are really cool books. So okay, so you got a Jake Reed one in the back of your head?
Yeah, so Jake Reed will be in the fourth one, and I spent most of a lot of time in my government service down on the border. I think it's the darkest place, one of the darkest places on earth, but it has some fascinating things that come out of it, and they're going to make their way into the book.
Well, I look forward to all of them. Just I'll hold it up again. The book is Scavenger Hunt. The author is Chad Boudreaux. I really appreciate you spending time with me today, and good luck with sales and the coming books.
Thanks so much. Great to be on your show.
Take care.